They call it history now. You read about it in your nice, warm classrooms. You watch your movies with the sweeping music and the clean, square-jawed actors. You think it's glorious. You think it's about duty. You think you'd be a hero, son. You have absolutely no idea what you'd do until the metal starts flying and the air turns to fire. You think you know what 18 looks like? 18 is a boy. It's a boy worrying about a pretty girl's smile at the local dance, or scraping nickels together for a milkshake. But my 18 was gray, violently churning water. It was the crushing, suffocating weight of a canvas pack cutting into my narrow shoulders, the freezing, paralyzing cold of the English Channel seeping straight past my skin, sinking deep into my bones. The M1 Garand in my hands, it felt so incredibly heavy. The wood was slick with sea spray, and the steel was so cold it practically burned the palms of my hands. I wasn't a man. I was a terrified, shivering child in a tin hat, standing in a floating metal coffin, waiting to die. We were packed in that Higgins boat, like cattle going to the slaughter. There was no room to move, no room to even breathe right. The smell, God, the smell is the first thing that comes back to me in the dark. It never really leaves you. It wasn't just the salty bite of the ocean air. It was raw, heavy diesel fuel fumes suffocating us, coating the back of my throat. And it was mixed with the sour, acidic stench of vomit and wet, rotting wool. Almost everyone was sick. And the fear. Fear has a physical smell, you know. It smells like copper, like old pennies and stale sweat. The waves were tossing us relentlessly. We'd go 15 feet up into the air, hovering on the crest, and then slam violently down into the troughs. Every single time we dropped, your stomach leaped straight up into your throat. Some men were weeping, just openly crying. Some were whispering prayers over and over like a broken record. Some were just staring at the steel walls. I remember looking at a kid named Tommy, or was it Arthur? Arthur. Yeah, Artie. He was from Ohio. No, wait. Pennsylvania. That's right. He still had that dark, cold dirt worked into the knuckles of his hands. He had a small photograph of his sweetheart wrapped carefully in wax paper. He was just turning it over and over in his numb blue fingers, not saying a single word, just staring at her face while the world pitched up and down. The noise of the boat's engine was a roaring, rattling monster trying to tear itself apart. It shook your teeth in your head. But underneath that mechanical roar, if you listened closely, you could hear the muffled, heavy thumps in the distance. Artillery. It was rolling thunder that never stopped. The sky above us was the color of dirty iron. The wind was a physical thing biting at my nose, making my fingers so stiff I wasn't even sure I could pull the trigger if I ever made it to the sand. And the waiting was the real torture. The worst part of the war wasn't the shooting, it was the waiting. You're just standing there, shoulder to shoulder, shivering so hard your jaw aches, knowing that any second that flat metal door in front of you is going to fall open into hell. And then the engine shifted gears. The pitch changed from a low roar to a high, strained whine. The nose of the craft lifted. We were hitting the sandbar. The coxswain up top yelled something. I couldn't understand him. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, my own heart trying to beat its way completely out of my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. Time just stopped. It felt like a whole century. It passed between the scraping of the hull on the sand beneath us and the squeal of the ramp's thick steel cables starting to unspool. 10 seconds. maybe less. But I lived an entire lifetime in those 10 seconds. The air felt thick, like molasses. I remember noticing the rivets on the steel ramp right in front of my face. I started counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. They were rusted around the edges, little orange flakes of rust. There was a drop of seawater hanging from the 5th rivet. Why was I looking at rust? I don't know. My brain was just cracking. It was desperately trying to hide from what was on the other side of that door. I watched that single drop of water tremble on the rivet, falling so incredibly slowly, before the ramp even touched the water, before it was fully down to let us out. The noise hit us. It wasn't the scattered pop, pop, pop of target practice back at camp. It was a mechanical tearing shriek, like a giant canvas sail being violently ripped in half by the devil himself. The German machine guns, they didn't aim at us. They just hosed the open boat. The metal walls of the craft started ringing like a slaughterhouse bell. Ping, ping, ping. Sparks flew into my eyes, hot and sharp. The man right in front of me, Artie, his head just snapped violently backward. His helmet flew off into the air. There was no Hollywood cry of pain, no heroic last words for his sweetheart. He was just there, breathing, terrified. And then he was a dead weight falling backward, a spray of hot, wet crimson hitting my cheek and neck. It was so hot against the freezing wind, I didn't think. There was absolutely no tactic running through my mind. None of the training mattered. It was just the raw, screaming animal instinct to get out of that metal box. I went over the side. I threw myself over the steel edge, not waiting for the ramp. The water hit me like a solid wall of ice. It punched the air straight out of my lungs in a single gasp. I went under, down, down into the dark, freezing green. My heavy boots, the waterlogged canvas web gear, the extra bandoliers of ammunition, it all acted like an anchor. It dragged me straight toward the bottom. I was drowning. My lungs were burning, screaming in the dark for oxygen. But I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd just fill up with salt water and die right there in the dark. I kicked. My God, I kicked with everything I had left in my miserable 18-year-old body. My fingers clawed at the water, trying to climb it. I broke the surface, gasping, violently coughing, swallowing a massive mouthful of sea foam and motor oil. The taste was vile. And then I saw it. Amidst the towering geysers of water erupting from mortar shells, amidst the deafening shrieks of boys being torn apart, I saw a broken, half-sunken wooden ration crate floating gently past my shoulder. And sitting right on top of that splintered wood, perfectly still, untouched, was a single, bright green apple, just sitting there. Someone's morning ration. The water around me was literally boiling with lead. Boys were screaming out for their mothers in voices that didn't even sound human. And I just floated there, treading water, staring intensely at that damn apple. It looked so crisp, so perfectly normal, so beautifully out of place. I watched it bob up and down on the bloody waves. I couldn't look away from it while the whole world tore itself to bloody shreds all around me. I just wanted to take a bite of that apple. I don't remember running across the sand. I must have. I have to assume I did. My next memory is the heavy, dragging weight of the water in my wool trousers. The wet sand sucking at my boots like wet cement, trying to pull me back into the ocean. I remember the noise, a constant, physical, deafening roar of explosions that literally shook the jelly inside my eyeballs. I threw myself forward, crawling on my elbows, digging my fingernails into the broken shells and shingle until I hit the wooden logs of the seawall. I pressed my face hard into the wet, sharp rocks. They cut my cheek, but I didn't care. The pain meant I was alive. I squeezed my eyes shut so tight I saw stars. I was breathing so hard, so frantically, my throat tasted like copper and blood. Then, God help me, I made the absolute mistake of looking back over my shoulder. The water wasn't green or gray anymore. The tide was coming in, and it was red. Thick, foamy, terrible red. The beach was just a smoking junkyard of broken, twisted men and burning metal. There were boys, kids I had shared cigarettes and laughed with just hours before, floating face down in the shallow surf, gently rolling back and forth with the waves, floating like discarded driftwood. It was totally quiet in my head suddenly. The machine guns were still tearing the air apart. The artillery shells were still hitting the cliffs, throwing dirt and smoke everywhere. But in my mind, total, absolute silence. That was the exact second it happened. The 18-year-old kid who liked baseball and sneaking out to dances, he died right there on those wet stones. He bled out on the shingle. He never made it off that beach. The thing that finally stood up and kept walking toward the bluffs, that was just a ghost in a uniform. I've carried the heavy ghost of that morning with me for over 80 years. You think time heals? People always say time heals all wounds. It's a lie. Time doesn't heal a damn thing. It just covers the horrors in a thin, fragile layer of dust. The nights are still the worst. When my house is dark and quiet and the world is asleep, I can still smell the diesel fuel. I can still feel the freezing, oily water filling up my boots. I can still taste the salt. People look at me now, and they call me a hero. They see the hat, they shake my frail hand, and they thank me for my service. I hate it. I nod politely and I smile for them, but inside, I hate it. The heroes never got the chance to grow old. The heroes never got to come home and have children, or buy a little house, or complain about their aching joints when it rains. The heroes are still 18. They are forever 18, frozen in time, resting quietly beneath those endless rows of white crosses. I'm not a hero. I'm just a boy who survived. A man who woke up every single day for 80 years paying back a debt that can never, ever be settled. Because every breath I take, every sunrise I get to see doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the boys we left behind in the red water.